Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic. Let's do it. Creepypastas are great, but does anyone have any really creepy true stories? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. It's hard to say what qualifies as creepy. It could be seen as heartwarming. I don't know. My mother swears this is a true story, and frankly, I don't see why she would lie about it. My mom had 3 kids. There's me, the youngest, and my older brother. But before either of us were born, there was Jonathan. He was a sweet little blonde boy with big blue eyes, known for accidentally repeating Dad's swears in church, wholesome kid, great in school, active outside. When he was almost 6, he was riding his bike and fell and hit his head on a rock. He got up and said he felt fine. My mom found him the next morning in his bed when she tried to wake him up to go to kindergarten. One pupil dilated and the other not. She got him airlifted to the nearest hospital. During this time, Jonathan's best friend Nick was sitting at the breakfast table eating cereal. Nick suddenly gets up from the table and goes to the door. When his mom asks him what's up, Nick says that Johnny was calling for him. You see, Nick and Johnny lived on separate blocks, but they weren't allowed to cross the street without a parent. Because they were still fairly young, but they lived close enough to call on one another to come out and talk at their respective street corners. So Nick goes out to the street corner, while his mother receives a call from mine that Johnny was just declared dead in the hospital. Idle brain aneurysm that was triggered by the fall. Nick's mom can hardly handle this news and is now wondering where her son went. But Nick comes back a few minutes later and says that he heard Johnny calling to him, but he wasn't at the street corner when he looked, then sits down to continue eating his cereal. When his mom asks Nick what Johnny was saying, Nick says he had come to say goodbye. My mom told me this story when I was young, but it stuck with me. I wish I could have met him, but truthfully, I wouldn't be here to type this story to all you random strangers if he hadn't died. My mother only wanted 2 kids. I'm thankful for the chance I was given to live, and I feel like he died for me sometimes. I'm not religious, but I do feel spiritual when I think of Johnny. I'll try to get through this without breaking down. It's still kind of chilling to think about. Around the time I was 19, I was deployed to Iraq. My unit worked with bombs, and honestly, I didn't know I would make it home intact. About halfway through my tour, the Red Cross notified my unit that my father was terminally ill. Within a week, I was on a plane back to the States. Now, my dad being ill was something I'd grown used to. He was strong, though, and I never expected to actually lose him. I lost my mother when I was 7, and my father's lungs had collapsed shortly before then. He was on oxygen and needed a wheelchair to go anywhere. Medication by the handfuls were needed every few hours. He gained weight from limited movement, developed diabetes, and had already beaten cancer once. I never expected to lose him, and he wasn't the type to ever give up. I arrive home, head to the hospital, and he assures me he's fine and they're overreacting. I visit him every day I'm there, but he tells me he'll be fine by the time I get home, for good. I reluctantly go back overseas. I call his hospital whenever I have a few minutes of free time, and we're near a call center. My deployment finished, and he kept his promise. He comes home from the hospital because he says he doesn't want to die there. He gets worse and goes back. The family all visits, but we know he isn't improving. One day I'm at home and the phone rings. It's an unknown number, so I don't answer. It goes to the answering machine, and a very raspy voice mumbles, "Call the hospital." It's my dad. I grab the phone, but he has already hung up, so I called. They tell me he's been intubated for the past couple hours, and he just started going into cardiac arrest. He's not responsive, and we need to come say our goodbyes. I argue that he called me, and she says that's not possible. They've been working on him for some time now. I hung up and told my family the news. My sister and I started and stared at the answering machine. We played the tape again and again. That was the last time I heard my father's voice. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in the paranormal or ghosts, and I cannot come up with any logical explanation. I still get watery-eyed thinking about it. Me and my friends were driving home from a show we all went to. This was about 7 years ago or so in the Cerritos area. There's an elementary school, I think on 186th. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, we drove by a local elementary school, all of us joking and laughing, or whatever 16-year-olds do. And my friend's girlfriend looked over at the playground in the school, screamed, and refused to talk to anyone for a few hours. We all asked her what was wrong and what she saw and what happened, but nothing would make her tell us. We all thought she was someone on a playground or a dead body or something. All we knew was that she was seriously spooked. As a backstory, I should add that she's sensitive to paranormal happenings. I should also add that I don't really believe in ghosts or the like, but whatever. She would have doors fly open at her old house, clothes hangers fly off the rail, cups fall over, and then right themselves multiple times, just crazy shit. Anyway, she eventually told her boyfriend what she had seen. She said that she briefly saw a bunch of blood-covered people walking around the playground aimlessly. I immediately started blaming exhaustion, as it was around 2 a.m. when we drove by. We looked it up later, and turns out that a plane crashed into that school in the late 80s, and a lot of people had died. Cue spooky music. I was at a friend's house around 12 years ago. We were in the basement watching TV when his mom's boyfriend came down the stairs and told us to keep it down. We looked at each other, confused, because we were literally just watching TV and it wasn't on high volume at all. We said we weren't being loud, and he said, "You weren't yelling?" And we shook our heads. He just sort of does the look and tells us he and my friend's mom had heard someone screaming coming up from the furnace vents, so we thought it was coming from the basement where the furnace is. We didn't hear anything and were like 15 feet away from the furnace. Sadly, I can't verify the next story because I wasn't there, but my friend from the basement and another friend say they were upstairs in the kitchen one night hanging out, and they heard a scream clear as day coming out of one of the furnace vents. I freaked them out naturally, but I never did get to hear it. It was probably just metal creaking, but it was weird that we were so close and didn't hear anything that could be interpreted as a scream. I work in a nursing home as an aide in a hospice unit. One night I had 3 patients trying to die, and my job was to ensure that they were comfortable. The girls that worked the floor with me at night were awesome. We would always try and make each other laugh and get through the night as best we could. I was known for scaring girls. Sometimes I'd hide in the closet of a room where somebody had recently died. Their body and belongings were long gone in the empty room, and I'd press the call light and wait. The girls would come in and hastily shut it off, but I'd always jump out and scare the shit out of them. One night I was in the nurse's station, filling out a report since I had to give a patient, Kent, some narcotics when an aide rushed in. She swore that she thought she saw my shadow on the wall, as if I were hiding trying to scare her, but then she heard me laugh at the nurse's station. I decided to check it out, since there wasn't supposed to be anyone on our floor. As I walked over to the wall, I stood where the light would have created my shadow, and there was nothing. I laughed it off until the CNA started shrieking, and I turned around, and a shadow seemingly rose up the wall from the ground out of nothing. I stared at it and said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, is that the best you've got?" And I walked back to the nurse's station. A while later, I had to do rounds as I walked toward a patient's room. I heard 3 knocks on the door that led outside to the patio by their room, and I saw an older gentleman dressed in all black. I couldn't let him in because I didn't have the access code, so I told him to hold on a moment, and I would get the nurse to let him in. When she and I returned to the door, he was gone. She went outside and we couldn't find him, so I continued to the patient's room to check on him. There's blood everywhere, and the patient is on the floor bleeding. He had tried to get up, it appears, and flopped around a bit in his blood trying to get up. The nurse lifted him back into bed and we cleaned him up. There was nothing else we could do, as he was DNR, besides make sure he was comfortable. I went to my next patient's room and bam, dead. He had stopped breathing. I rushed to get the nurse and pulled his file, DNR also. We called the morgue and his family while I cleaned his body with an aide. I go to check on the patient who fell, vitals every 15 minutes for non-witnessed falls, and he's dead. I'm getting the nurse. She's frustrated because this takes 2 aides off the floor to care for the deceased and lots of paperwork for her. As I'm walking down the hall for linens, I see the old man I originally saw outside walking past the nurse's station, and he whispers, "One more Yakmia, and then I'm done for the night. Just one more." I jumped up because his whisper was so eerie, and I ran in the direction he was going. The patient's room door slammed shut, and when I ran in, she looked directly at me, took her last breath, and died. Her eyes are still staring directly at me for some reason. I remember her window being open and how odd it was. I ran to the window and didn't see anything. I slammed it shut, checked the woman for a pulse, and found nothing. The nurse had followed me and saw exactly what I saw and heard the voice whisper as I did. She was coming around the corner and swore she saw the man, and then I jumped up and ran after him and, like me, saw the patient's room door slam shut before I could get in there. When I turned around, I saw the nurse standing in the doorway, and she could only say, "I saw it too. Oh my God, I saw it too." TLDR. Worked as a med aide in a hospice ward and nurse, and I ran around while death showed himself and took his time killing 3 of our patients in one night. Weird one that happened to my sister a couple years ago. Background info. She and her now husband are house sitting for my brother-in-law's uncle. The uncle is old and starting to lose it. He rents out a basement suite, and a nice lady lives downstairs. She cleans the house when she is there, but he wanted my brother-in-law to come check on things and feed his old cat once in a while. Okay, so the first day they go to the house, sit, and get in, but they can't find the cat to make sure it's okay. My sister has cats and know that they like to hide when they're dying. So they're all worried and are looking everywhere for this cat. In all rooms, under the beds, and everything. Even check with the lady downstairs. She hasn't seen it. So my sister opens up the closet in the spare bedroom and is looking around for stuff on the floor. He moves a couple of things and sees a set of feet on the ground in the closet, with clothes blocking anything above the feet. The feet have nicely painted toenails and look human, but she assumes it's a doll or something. They look in a few more places, and all of a sudden the cat is in the middle of the living room just hanging out. So they lock the deadbolt and leave. Sister and her boyfriend go out for dinner and a movie, and she can't stop thinking about the feet and how real they looked. My sister had started dating her boyfriend fairly recently and didn't want to seem crazy, so she didn't bring it up, but a few hours into the night, she decided she needed to tell him. He decides that it's probably a doll, but he offers to go back and check anyway. When they arrive, my sister will only stay on the patio because she's scared, which makes him realize that this must be something serious. They go to get in the door, but the deadbolt is now unlocked and the handle is locked. Now he thinks there must be someone in there. At the door, there's a fireplace, so once he is in there, he grabs the sharp poker stick from the fireplace tools and starts to sneak toward the closet. He opens up the closet and sees the same set of feet with painted toenails on the floor. He pokes it lightly with a fire stick, and the toes scrunch up. He proceeds to smack the foot as hard as he can with the sharp stick and yells, "Get out of there!" Out comes a lady in her mid-30s holding the cat and a can of Coke. It turns out she was friends with the basement tenant. When she became homeless, her friend let her stay with her until she found out she was addicted to crack. She started leaving drugs around the house and had shady people coming into the house, so she kicked her out. Somehow she got a key to upstairs and had been staying there while the uncle was gone. Police were called and she was arrested. TLDR. Crackhead in the closet. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every night. He would answer, and it was this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this and it stopped. Then after a week or so, it began again, the exact same noise, exact same time. Finally, one day, he decided to back dial the call. It was an old man who had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were left. He decided to say screw it. He ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. You guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every night. I was unsure why this was happening. He back-dialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job and his phone. The calls stopped, of course. His phone is now disconnected. So one day, my mom asked me to listen to this weird message she got on her home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaking out. He back-dialed the number again, and it said the number was disconnected this time. I never heard from it again after that. I was once featured in a St. Jude Survivor newsletter when I was about 5 years old in the early 90s. The newsletter went out across the country and apparently into Canada. There was this guy named Mitchell who called my family up out of the blue because he had read my cancer survival story. He lived somewhere in Canada and claimed to be this big-time Christian who wanted to talk to me about God and prayer. My mom let him talk to me for whatever reason, and the guy actually just wanted to talk to me about ALF. This Canadian dude named Mitchell was obsessed with ALF and somehow got a hold of our mailing address and sent me tons of ALF merchandise, coloring books, pencils, ALF everything. For some reason, my parents let him talk to me whenever he would call because they bought into his God stuff and liked how he sent me ALF crap. This went on and off for about a year until he asked me if I've ever heard of John Wayne Gacy. He told me who he was and that he had escaped him when Gracie tried kidnapping him when he was a kid. He told me I should tell my parents they shouldn't trust strangers because you never know who you could really be talking to. I remember he didn't sound menacing when he said it. It was just a matter of fact. Of course, my parents freaked when I told them that, and they changed numbers and called the police. They never really did anything since the guy lived in Canada, by all accounts, and hadn't really threatened me. Also, keep in mind that Mitchell somehow had our mailing address and knew exactly where we lived. We had plans on moving soon anyway, though. Fast forward 10 years to about 2001. We live in a new house, in a new state, with everything unlisted. I'm now 15. What did we get in the mail? Yep, you guessed it, an effing ALF coloring book. ALF, huh? I know I said ALF a few times. Maybe I was just assuming through the read that it was some acronym for a pediatric cancer, till I realized it was an alien sitcom. So, there you go. Weird story, though. About a month ago, I was flying down to Texas to visit a close friend, and it was about 8:30, so it was dusk. The sun was shining inside the plane, so most everyone had the sliding blinds down. Anyway, out of nowhere, I had the urge to look out the window, so go ahead and do so. I immediately looked down to see the view, and out of nowhere, probably 400 to 500 feet below the plane, a small jet-like or missile-looking object flies by extremely fast. It was man-made because it had decals and was jet black, but it lacked wings and barely looked large enough to hold a single person. It flew in the opposite direction of the plane, and I saw the jet stream it left behind longer than I saw the actual object. I remember saying, "Whoa," and looking around to see if anyone saw the thing I did to no avail. I still have no idea what I saw. It's not exactly creepy, but extremely strange and a little unsettling. A few years ago, I went to a Christmas party. That night, my housemates went home earlier, while I decided to stay and get in the Christmas spirit with a few other friends. I ended up getting pretty hammered and got home around 3 a.m. Instead of going straight to bed, I got another beer inside, then went out to the back porch to have a smoke and look at the stars. I was outside for a couple of minutes when I saw the light go on in the kitchen. My housemate came out and looked at me out the back. I waved and generally looked like a drunk idiot. I thought he was going to come out and get a debrief on the rest of the evening, as there were some good laughs we had not relevant to the story. Anyway, he just gets a glass of water and goes to bed. I finished my smoke and beer, and so do I. The next morning, we're rehashing the previous night when he mentions getting up and seeing me having a smoke out back. "Who came back from the party with you last night?" I give him a sideways look and reply, "No one, dude. I was out there alone." He insists, "Nah, man. There was someone out there with you, behind you on the porch, when you were looking inside waving. I didn't come out because I thought it was some random friend from the Christmas party I didn't know." I couldn't be bothered making introductions. To this day, he stands by this version of events. Whoever it was must have been standing close behind me the whole time. I saw no one and heard nothing. It gives me willies every time I think about it. When I was 2 years old, my uncle committed a double murder and suicide. He was a meth head and had been taking money from my grandmother, and finally one day she told him no more. That just happened to be the day I was at their house. He went to his room and brought out a shotgun. He shot my grandfather in the face. My grandmother ran and grabbed me. He shot her in the back. She dropped me and rolled over. He pulled out a big knife and hit her in the neck with it. He turned his attention to me. I remember that vividly. I was crying, and he picked me up. He rocked me for a minute and sat me in my swing. He pointed the shotgun right at my face, and then all of a sudden he just stopped. It seemed like something was fighting with him. I physically prevented him from blowing me into a million parts. The next thing I know, the gun is in his mouth, and bang. That's all I remember. My parents never told me a single thing about it, and up until a year ago, they didn't know I knew about it. When I told my dad, he started crying and told me how I was just swinging in my swinger like someone was pushing me. I had forgotten about it until I was like 13. All of a sudden I remembered. It effed with my head for a while. My dad used to work in a juvenile detention center in the Miami area in the early 1970s. He said there was one inmate that reminded him a lot of a young Hannibal Lecter. He wasn't strong, but he was smart and very persuasive. One day he started a riot in his block of cells just by talking to the other inmates. My dad and another guard were sent in to check it out and try to calm things down. Everybody in the block was going crazy, banging on the bars, howling and yelling at each other. Everybody except young Hannibal Lecter. He was standing still in the middle of his cell with his arms folded, smiling and muttering the same phrase over and over quietly. My dad tried to focus on what he was saying, and after a couple of seconds, he understood. The inmate was reciting my dad's home phone number. Edit, I don't know how he got it. Maybe he bribed another guard into getting it for him, or he saw it written on some form on his way between rooms or something. The guy never called my dad. In fact, he never really got any strange phone calls ever. But the level of determination this inmate must have had, all just to freak my dad out, was simply impressive.